Welcome to the Lean to the Left podcast, where we focus on the key social issues and challenges that face most of us every day. Today, we're looking at dementia, specifically Alzheimer's disease, with which nearly 7 million Americans live every day. It's a tragedy that's projected to grow into a $1 trillion crisis by 2050. Now, the tragedy of Alzheimer's can certainly be told with the numbers. It's the fifth leading cause of death among people age 65, and more than 11 million Americans provide unpaid care for people with that disease and other forms of dementia. The toll on those caregivers is heavy, and so the story of Alzheimer's goes way beyond the numbers to the human consequences of both suffering from and coping with the disease. Today, we're taking another look at Alzheimer's, and we're pleased to have with us today Lisa Skinner. She's the author of Truth, Lies, and Alzheimer's, Its Secret Faces. Co-authored with Douglas W. Collins, it's an important guide for families navigating the complexities of Alzheimer's and dementia. Their book provides an unconventional path to peace of mind for caregivers and loved ones facing this devastating diagnosis. Lisa, thanks so much for joining us today on the Lean to the Left podcast.
Thank you for having me, Bob. I appreciate it very much.
First, can you tell us a little bit about the journey that brought you to write this book? Why did you do it? What brought you to it?
It's a accumulation of several different things that unfolded during my life, and it led me to this path. I'll start with my very first experience with Alzheimer's disease. It was 50 years ago with my grandmother.
Okay.
And she and I were very close. She only lived a few miles from me. So after I got my driver's license, I wanted to go show it off to Grandma. And so I drove over to her house to have a little catch-up chat with her. And the minute we sat down in her living room, she started telling me about these birds that were living in her mattress.
I read that in your book, yes.
Yeah, it's the first story.
Yeah.
And she insisted that they would come out at night while she was sleeping and peck at her face.
Yeah.
And then she pointed to her walls and she said, "Do you see those? Do you see them? Do you see them?" I go, "What? What?" All those rats running along the walls.
Oh my.
And of course, I didn't see anything, but I didn't say, because I'm like, what's going on here? And then the last thing that she insisted to me in that same conversation was that these men were constantly breaking into her home. They were stealing everything she owns, including her precious jewelry. And she was convinced that they were eventually going to harm her and take over her house.
Okay.
And move in and squat.
Wow.
And I didn't know how to react to these.
You were how old, Lisa?
I was 16. I just got my driver's license.
Oh my.
And my mother said nothing about my grandmother. Of course, I didn't notice anything. I saw her regularly. And then out of nowhere come these far-fetched stories that are unbelievable. And the thing is I came from the generation that we were strictly taught, don't contradict or argue with your elders. They deserve the utmost respect. And even though I didn't see how any of these tales she was telling me could possibly be true, especially since I didn't see any rats running along the wall, I didn't argue with her because that was ingrained in me growing up. But what I did do is I said, "Oh, Grandma, this sounds really fascinating. Let's go in your room. I want you to show me where these birds are getting in and out of your mattress." So we went in there. I threw the covers off. I checked the mattress both on the top and pushed it up and checked the bottom. And I said, "So Grandma, tell me, how are they getting in and out of the mattress? I'm not seeing any obvious holes or anything like that." And she looks me straight in the eye and she says, "Oh, Lisa, they're there. They're just very clever.
Wow.
And of course, I didn't know it at the time. I was a teenager and I had not chosen my career path at that time, which turned out to be as a certified dementia practitioner and a behavioral specialist.
Right.
But her response, as I learned later, was absolutely classic and brilliant and very masterful at responding to what she was having, which was a false belief, believing these birds lived in her mattress.
Mhm.
Story about the rats was what we call a hallucination, which is very common in people living with dementia. And then, of course, her believing that these men were breaking in and stealing her jewelry. That's very common behavior and behavioral expression in dementia. We call that paranoia, which is
Right.
very common. She's displaying all three of these behaviors. And then following my grandmother, I've had 7 more family members that have lived with one of the diseases that causes dementia. And I said to my mother when I got home, why didn't you tell me and prepare me for these far-fetched stories that grandma ended up telling me? And she says, okay, she's been diagnosed with senile dementia, but that's what they called it back then, which is synonymous with Alzheimer's disease.
Yeah.
And then she said, but we're not talking about it. And that was very common during the
Right.
70s.
Right.
People associated Alzheimer's disease or with senility, which is a
Right.
mental health crisis.
Yeah.
And we have since learned that it's an actual brain disease. It's damaging the brain. But that was common that you didn't talk about it. So she never said anything to me. I had to find out trial and error and hearing these far-fetched stories.
Yeah.
And I'll have to say, if it hadn't been for the strict upbringing that you respect your elders, that the way I grew up, I probably would have contradicted her. I probably would have argued with her. I probably would have said, what are you talking about? And as it turns out, after I went into this professionally, that's absolutely the wrong thing to do, is to try to steer somebody back into your reality.
Yeah.
This was her reality. She 100% believed in everything she was telling me.
Yeah.
And it really would have been futile for me to try to change her mind. It wouldn't have worked, as I've come to learn. I ended up getting my degree in behavioral health, in human behavior.
Okay.
I've always been fascinated by it. What makes people tick? Why do they behave the way they do? Especially people behave differently in social situations versus organizational situations. So I didn't know what I was going to do with it, but I ended up answering an ad in a paper. They were looking for what they called a community counselor, and it was in the elder care industry. And the job basically was to guide families and to educate families on the day-to-day challenges of living with dementia and see if their loved one was an appropriate fit for the community and do all the assessments and the care planning. So that's how I started.
Okay.
And then I ended up, it's been 30 years, I ended up making a lifelong career. And to answer your question about what inspired me to write the book was I left the elder care industry and I started my own consulting business. And I was called over to a client's house, and she and her husband picked my brain for 2.5 hours.
Okay.
And as it turns out, her father had been diagnosed with Parkinson's disease.
Okay.
Her mother-in-law, her husband's mother, had been diagnosed with Alzheimer's disease
Right.
about 2 years prior to my visit to their home. And she stops me after 2.5 hours and she said, I just want to tell you something really quickly, because this is really important for you to hear. She says, you have provided us with more valuable and helpful information in the last 2.5 hours that you've been here than we've been able to find anywhere else from anybody else
Wow.
in the 2 years since both our parents received their diagnosis. And she says to me, she says, you have to write a book. She said it would be very selfish of you to not share what you know
Okay.
to people like me who are so desperate
Right.
for this information, because we're the ones that have to deal with this on a
Yeah.
day-to-day basis, and we don't know
Absolutely.
how to handle these situations.
Yeah, for sure.
Hallucinations and false beliefs and paranoia. So it's
Yeah.
just the information is so limited.
Yeah.
And that
Yeah.
really was the inspiration behind me writing my first book.
So you could say that your career path was not launched, but I guess influenced strongly by that episode with your grandmother.
Absolutely. Yes, I carried that. I carry that in the back of my brain to today. I'll
Yeah,
never forget that experience.
sure. You have another example towards the front of the book too. Was it your grandfather?
No, it wasn't my dad's twin brother,
Oh,
my
your dad's
uncle.
twin brother, was that it? Yeah.
Is that the one with the stranger in the mirror?
Yes, the stranger in the
Yes.
mirror, where he talked to the mirror. He thought that the person in the mirror was someone else, his friend, and became friends with that person and wanted to know why the guy had his shoes on,
Yes. And
right?
this is, I love that story. That was a true personal story, just like my grandmother's story was a
Yeah,
true personal story.
yeah.
The other stories, a lot of the other stories in the book were things I saw
Hmm.
firsthand
Hmm.
working in the elder care industry of people living
Sure.
with Alzheimer's and dementia. But that was my dad's twin brother.
Okay.
And my aunt told me that story. And I was so fascinated by that story. And I thought it was so cute too. But it turns out that the whole message of that story, Stranger in the Mirror, is an
Hmm.
actual phenomenon that occurs in people with dementia.
Wow.
They look in the mirror and they don't recognize their own reflection because in their mind they're a younger version of themselves. And
Yeah.
he looks in the mirror that's in the
And
hallway.
yeah, who's that old
He says,
person? Yeah.
yeah, who's that old man? And he
Yeah.
goes running in and asks
Yeah.
my aunt, who's that guy
Yeah.
that's come
Well,
to
I wonder
visit?
that half the time when I look in the mirror anymore,
Me too.
and I don't know. Maybe I should go get diagnosed.
with
Anyway,
with
I,
my
I go, who the hell is that ugly looking dude that's so gray and losing his hair?
must be a new friend.
It must be a new friend. That's right. Now, beyond forgetfulness, how can people distinguish between normal aging, forgetfulness, mild cognitive impairment, and dementia?
That's like the $64 million question
Right.
because even in today's climate, doctors have a very difficult time differentiating between what signs are really looking like just normal aging forgetfulness and an actual brain disease like Alzheimer's that is causing the symptoms. Because the symptoms in the beginning of Alzheimer's disease are so subtle
Yeah.
that it's almost impossible to differentiate between what we experience as we're aging, forgetting where we put our keys or where our glasses are, or
Right.
walking into a room and forgetting why you walked in there, and
Right.
an actual brain disease that's causing these symptoms. Most
Right.
people today, even, are not diagnosed with
Mm.
Alzheimer's disease till they're well into their mid stage.
Yeah.
So when we experience these types of, I don't know, just periodic moments of forgetfulness,
Yeah.
like where did I put my keys? Where did I put my phone? I do that every day. Where's my
I
phone?
did that yesterday.
Yeah.
I came
You know,
home
I
from
do
We
too.
came home from getting something to eat somewhere, and I had put them in my car. I had put my phone in my car, and I came into my office and I sat down at my desk and I said, "Where the hell is my phone?" And I walked all around and I finally found it. Yeah, it was in my car.
And then to add even throw another wrench into the mix, there's a transitional stage that we call mild cognitive impairment.
Yeah.
And mild cognitive impairment is more severe than just normal aging forgetfulness. It probably happens a little bit more often than
Mm.
normal aging forgetfulness episodes do, and a little bit more severe. But the thing that we've learned with mild cognitive impairment is it does not always advance to dementia, full-blown dementia. And when I say that, dementia is caused by an underlying brain disease like Alzheimer's, and there
Right.
are over 200 known brain diseases.
Oh, I
People
didn't know
can,
that.
yes, people
Yeah.
can stay in this mild cognitive impairment situation, and as long as it's not, the underlying cause is not one of these brain diseases, it will not progress
Okay.
because Alzheimer's disease and these other brain diseases progress. There's no cure, there's no treatment, and there's no reversing it.
What
So
are some
not
of the, yeah, what are some of the symptoms of mild cognitive impairment?
would be memory loss,
Okay.
getting where you put your keys, but it's
Yeah.
happening more frequently. Another
Right.
sign that typically shows up in mild cognitive impairment is repeating questions
Right.
or stories, which is
Right.
very commonly seen in people with dementia, but it also happens with mild cognitive impairment.
Hmm.
They'll just keep repeating the same thing over and over again in the same conversation. Yeah. So that
Hmm.
does happen in mild cognitive impairment, but then it also happens with low dementia pretty
Right.
regularly. It's a very common occurrence. And
Okay.
then other cognitive functions start to decline, but not as the difference is not as severely as it does with dementia.
Okay.
And then with mild cognitive impairment, it's not in every case, it doesn't progress to dementia. And some people, and this is an important thing for people to understand, depending on the underlying cause of the mild cognitive impairment, would mean the difference between whether or not they can recover from the cognitive decline or whether it's going to progress to full-blown dementia. So one example, there are metabolic reasons why people experience cognitive impairment or memory loss or cognitive decline, and they're in this mild cognitive impairment. So a thyroid disorder is a perfect
Oh,
example.
really?
If people have a thyroid disorder, it can really throw your memory function out of whack. But the difference is if you had full-blown dementia, there's no reversing it, there's no curing it, there's no treatment for it. But because in this particular example, it's being caused by a thyroid disorder. Well, thyroid disorders can be treated. And I have seen many people who are suffering from memory impairment who ended up having something like a thyroid problem or a urinary tract infection. And once the problem is treated and managed and brought back under control,
Hmm.
their symptoms go away. They're normal again, or they don't progress any farther.
Okay.
So that's a huge difference
Yeah.
between, yeah, that a lot of people aren't aware of.
So that's it really important if you have a loved one who you feel like may be moving down this path towards dementia, that you should have them checked for a thyroid situation because that could be the cause. Is that
That's
right?
just one of them is a
Yeah.
thyroid disorder. There are
Right.
many underlying causes of these symptoms that all of
Okay.
us, yeah, but that would be the place to start is
Okay.
to have the doctor test you for anything that is known to contribute to memory impairment and rule it out.
Sure. Understand. The book is described as providing an unconventional path to peace of mind. Can you elaborate on that, on what makes that approach unique?
And it also supports why I titled the book It's Secret Faces.
Okay, I was
Um,
going to ask you that. Yeah.
Yeah, that's hidden meaning because dementia, and when I say dementia, I want to clarify with everybody, dementia is not a disease. dementia is a broad term, an umbrella term that's used to refer to the symptoms and the behaviors that are caused by a brain disease that's damaging somebody's brain. Most people that I've spoken to in my 30-year career believe that Alzheimer's disease is exclusively a disease that only causes memory loss and confusion. It is so much more complex than that. You basically, by the end of the progression of the disease, a person has lost almost all of their cognitive function, their ability to reason, their ability to make judgments about things. I'll give you a quick example. We were taught from a very young age that before we ever step off a curb and into a street, whether it's jaywalking or in a designated crosswalk,
Right.
you look both ways, right? Because people
Correct.
do
Correct.
dumb things. They run
Yep.
stoplights and things like that. So we were taught that, we were conditioned. It becomes second nature that when we're grown, we don't step off a curb or even walk with a green light unless we check both ways just to make sure that somebody
Right.
was not hurling their way towards us. With dementia, you lose that ability. Anybody that is at a certain stage in their dementia, once that happens to them and they lose the ability to reason things out and use judgment, even though it was ingrained in them for decades, conceivably step off a curb right in the middle of a street. They wouldn't look anyway, they'll just walk because they no longer have the capacity to use the judgments and the reasoning that we were taught from very young ages. And so it's putting those people definitely in harm's way because they don't have the capacity to stop and, oh, wait a minute, I need to check and make sure that it's safe. They don't think that way anymore. They've lost that function. So the reason why I did describe in the book an unconventional path is because, and these are the secret faces of the disease that people aren't aware of, because you lose so much of your cognitive function as the disease progresses, caregivers and family members literally need to retrain their brains and respond to all the behavioral expressions and all the symptoms that we see crop up that are actually part of the disease. I'll just piggyback to my grandmother. The false beliefs, like her birds living in the mattress, the hallucinations, like the rats invading her home, the paranoia. Right. And there is a very definite, skilled way to respond to those behaviors that we see very commonly. So that's what I mean by an unconventional path, because our gut instinct reaction, because this is the way we were wired from the time we were born, is to fix the person, to correct the person. And we have learned through the school of hard knocks, trial and error, that it doesn't work. We used to treat people that way. It was called reality orientation therapy.
Oh, right.
And the common practice was if somebody was telling you something that didn't match your reality, then your job was to steer them back to your reality. Right. And we learned that it doesn't work through, decades of practicing this. So now, and it's become popular probably the last 20 years, we join their reality and meet them where they're at, because we know without any doubt at all that there's absolutely nothing you can say or do to change a person's false belief. Now, these false beliefs can be very temporary. My grandmother could have been believing that the birds were in her mattress for 10 minutes of our visit, and then all of a sudden, like, what are you talking about? What birds? Birds can't live in somebody's mattress. But you have to take their cues. As long as she's talking about it, she's having a false belief, and she believes that there really are birds living in her mattress, and there would have
Right.
been nothing I could have said
Right.
to change her reality, what was in her mind at that time. She has to do it on her own.
Okay.
So we practice now this join their reality, meet them where they are, and it minimizes anxiety in them and frustration because they're trying to tell you something, but you won't validate what they're saying. And it just causes more problems than just going along with them.
Yeah. Now, Lisa, are there some things that people can do to minimize their risk of developing Alzheimer's disease? I think that I read somewhere in your book that could be up to 40%. Is
Yes,
that right?
this is true.
Yeah.
And this
Tell
is
me about
based
that.
on decades of studies and
Hmm.
scientific research, and what we know today that okay, so I'm going to say this, it's complicated, but I'm going to say it as, I don't know, easy to understand as possible. There
Okay.
are a lot of risk factors that we have discovered that go into determining somebody's risk of developing Alzheimer's disease,
Mm.
whether they're at a high risk or a medium risk or low risk. And there's 4 risk factors that we call non-modifiable. You can't change them.
Okay.
And it's age is number 1, because Alzheimer's disease typically starts to show up after the age of 65. So we can't do anything about our chronological age. We are the age we are. Gender, more females develop Alzheimer's disease than men. Genetics is another non-modifiable risk factor. And then ethnicity is also a non-modifiable risk factor. There are some ethnic backgrounds that are at a higher risk of developing Alzheimer's disease than others.
Oh, really? I didn't
So,
know that. Yeah.
yes. So there are 4 right there that you can't
Hmm.
control. And so if you have all 4 of those that apply to you, then you already have 4 strikes that
You're
that
hurting. You're hurting, I guess we could just say.
and that's not even factoring in the modifiable risk, and there's a huge list of those.
Uh-huh.
If you have all 4 of the non-modifiable risks that apply to you
Right.
or me, does that mean you're going to develop Alzheimer's disease? No. It just raises your risk. It
Okay.
increases your risk
Okay.
of developing it. Then
Hmm.
you have to factor in the what we call the modifiable ones. The number 1 modifiable risk factor for developing Alzheimer's disease is cardiovascular disease.
Okay.
But the reason why we call it modifiable is because heart disease can be treated. You can take pills for hypertension, you can take medications for high blood pressure.
Right.
So the more of these risk factors that apply to any one individual, the higher their risk is of it showing up starting at the age of 65. Still doesn't mean they definitely will, but it just increases the risk. So lifestyle choices has become a big one. We found out through these studies and scientific research that you definitely are what you eat, like the old
Hmm.
adage said. And eating ultra processed foods and simple carbohydrates does increase a person's risk of developing brain disease. It causes inflammation, and inflammation has been tied to more instances of Alzheimer's disease. And exercise and stimulating your brain, cognitively challenging your brain.
Hmm.
So there are a lot of things that we can do
Okay.
starting at any age, any
Hmm.
stage of your life, that could mean the difference between you developing Alzheimer's disease when you're older and not developing it. And of
Okay.
course, again, it's not set in stone that if you eat fast food every day of your life and you
Hmm.
smoke and you
Hmm.
have heart disease and all these risk factors that are not being managed, it still doesn't mean that any given person will develop Alzheimer's. What I really want to emphasize is it definitely means that you've increased your risk And so if there's any of these things that you can do to lower that risk, then, you may escape that fate.
Okay. So if you are real active throughout your whole life, let's say you're an exercise person, you constantly exercise and you pay good attention to your diet, and you are involved with activities that challenge your mind, your brain, you have a better chance of either minimizing the result, the turn towards Alzheimer's, or what? Does it, you can minimize it or you can avoid it, or it's a stroke of luck, or what is it?
Yeah, that's pretty much what it comes down to is
Yeah, a
luck,
stroke of
but
luck.
you can definitely minimize your risk.
Yeah.
Can't avoid it altogether. There's
Mm-hmm.
no known thing that any of us can do to avoid it.
Right.
But I think that minimizing it for a lot of people is significant enough to say, hey,
Yeah.
I don't want to be sorry when I'm 80 years old that I ended up with Alzheimer's disease, knowing I could have done this in my younger years and not ended up
Exactly.
like this.
Yeah.
But
Yeah. Yeah. So if you're a person who is overweight, who has smoked his entire or her entire life, done a lot of drinking, partying and stuff, that's not good for the outlook of dementia and Alzheimer's.
you might escape it, but your chances of developing Alzheimer's disease when starting at age 65
Yeah.
are pretty high.
Okay. So a better lifestyle is better. I guess we could say.
That's what the conclusion that scientific research has demonstrated to
Yeah,
us.
I
And
understand.
to me, it really makes sense.
Yeah.
A
Let
lot
me
of
ask you
these,
this, Lisa. If you see a loved one, family member, whoever, who is beginning to experience demonstrate these lapses in memory, and it comes on gradually, but you begin to notice the repeating of the of questions and so on, like you were describing earlier. Is there something that the family members should do to prepare for a possible Alzheimer's diagnosis?
one of the myths that we still live with about Alzheimer's disease is if you do have it and you receive a diagnosis of Alzheimer's disease, that equates with, okay, that person's life is over.
Yeah,
That's not true at all.
correct.
First of all, and perhaps a lot of people aren't aware of this, that you can have Alzheimer's disease in your brain for a decade or more and be completely asymptomatic while it's doing its damage. You don't show
Oh, is it?
any symptoms at all. That happens a lot. And that's why it's so difficult to know in the early stages if this is a brain disease causing even the most minimal signs, like where'd I put my phone? Or is this the beginning of something much more serious? We don't know. We
Yeah.
can't tell in those earliest stages. By the time you start noticing obvious signs, then I advise family members to start the assessment process with a physician, see if they can, through the process of elimination, eliminate anything else that might be causing these signs, like a thyroid condition, some of the other ones that will mirror the same symptoms.
Sure.
And then if a person does receive an Alzheimer's diagnosis, oh, another thing that I like to advise people, start having, because any of us could develop Alzheimer's disease or one of the other brain diseases. And because it eventually robs every one of us of our cognitive functions, start having conversations with your loved ones, with your family members, with your parents, with your grandparents about what their end of life wishes are. because eventually they're not going to be able to tell you what their preferences and their wishes are. And a lot of adult children don't want to have to make those decisions for somebody else's life.
Right.
So I recommend you start having those conversations while their brains are still relatively healthy, and you'll know their wishes, what they want and what they don't want. Do they want do not resuscitate? Do they want to just whatever the family decides is the best actionable path for their family? And then once a dementia diagnosis does come, or Alzheimer's or one of the other brain diseases like frontotemporal dementia or Lewy body dementia, then it's time to start gathering the legal documents. There's a lot of them out there that are available, that you can be proactive about this versus reactive and start scrambling around to try and figure everything out after the diagnosis, but you're already overwhelmed by getting that diagnosis. And there are so many different legal documents out there, like power of attorney and medical power of attorney and do not resuscitate and trusts. I think that you should be familiar with what is out there. There's just so many of them, and most of us don't pay attention to that sort of thing until we have to. And then it's scrambling around trying to react to the given situation. And that way you can have those conversations with your loved ones too while they're still healthy and really prepare. And then the last thing that I can emphasize, and I can't overstate this, learn as much as you can. Educate yourself about what these diseases do to the people who live with them, because they are very complex. And there are things that are associated that follow these diseases that you might not be aware of. And if you're not aware of them, you definitely won't be prepared for them. Like me going over to my grandmother's house and having to find out about the birds and the what?
Yeah.
So I think that it's much better to prepare yourself because it's a very long course. My grandmother lived with it for 20 years. The average is 8 to 15. That's a long time to try to care for somebody or maintain a healthy relationship with somebody when you never know what's going to come out on a day-to-day basis, what they're going to say, what they're going to believe. It's just a very challenging journey to be on for everybody involved.
Yeah. So, what are some of the things that can be done to help the caregivers, the people that have to deal with this every day?
I practice what's called a person-centered approach to care, to dementia care. And basically, it's focusing on each individual person because each individual person experiences dementia differently. And so the focus becomes on the person rather than the disease, because you can put 10 people in a room, like in a memory care facility, and every single one of them is experiencing their dementia in a different way. Because the care plan that seems to be the most effective at knowing how to effectively react and respond to a lot of these peculiarities that we see with this disease, personality changes, the mood swings, the outbreaks, the false beliefs, it just goes on, is to, first of all, recognize it as being part of the disease, understand it, that this is how the disease is changing the brain of the person living with it. And then knowing the most effective ways, the best practices, in other words, of de-escalating the situation.
Okay.
Because it's really, and this goes back to the non-conventional approach, the way we're wired to instinctively react to some of the signs, symptoms, and behaviors that we see with this disease are counterintuitive to the best practice, the most effective ways, like not arguing and not taking things personally. But you really have to retrain your brain because that's not the way most of us are wired. We
Yeah.
want to fix people, we want to correct them.
Yeah.
And that can really seriously backfire on you if you don't know the best approach to whatever the situation is that you're experiencing at that given moment.
Yeah. So I guess what you're talking about really is when you are faced with challenging behavior from the person, right? Is that what you're talking about?
So there are ways that people would and do respond that can escalate it into a more serious situation
Yeah.
and drive the person to an emotional meltdown. We call it a catastrophic reaction, or know an effective approach by having the information, having a toolbox, if you want to say that, okay, my mom believes that I stole her jewelry. And instead of me insisting I didn't, and why would you think that of me? And just really adding fuel to her fire
Yeah.
and creating a more serious situation, knowing how to effectively respond to that accusation to diffuse it.
Yeah. Yeah.
And that takes skill, it takes knowledge, it takes education,
Yeah.
because, like I said, it's counterintuitive to the way we instinctively want to respond.
Yeah, for sure. Okay. All right. Listen, I really do appreciate you coming on and talking about this. It's so important. And the advice you've given seems to make a ton of sense to me, for sure. Is there anything else you'd like to add before we sign off?
I want people to know, because I've seen this too many times in the 30 years that I've been practicing, that please don't feel like you have to go out at this alone. And so many people do. I've run support groups before in the past. So whether you join a support group or you take other measures to understand these diseases more clearly so you can be more prepared. But yeah, just try not to feel like you're the only one on the planet that is dealing with this. It might, and I know it feels that way. I've been there. Many of the people that I work with feel that way. It's a very natural feeling to think that you're the only one, but you don't have to be. There is support available out there now, and I would recommend that if this does touch your family, or if you are caring for somebody with these challenging diseases, then it takes a village, I guess is the best way I can say it. And
Okay. So you are strongly advising people who are caring for folks with this in this situation to participate in some sort of support group to talk it out with other people who are experiencing the same thing. Is that right?
not to neglect your own health. We
Okay.
see caregiver burnout right and left with dementia because
Mhm.
it's so overwhelming for both family members and the actual hands-on caregivers. And a lot of times those are the family members.
Uh,
But yeah, have resources available to you so you can put yourself first and foremost, because if you burn out and you get sick because of the stress, it's not going to be any good for anybody, especially the caregivers and the family members. And
really?
it happens a lot. We see it every single day
Yeah.
because it's so stressful.
Yeah. Okay. Talking about groups, this is a little bit off topic, but it's funny, I think. So, I'll tell you about it. My wife Jackie and I we went to go out to dinner somewhere different, and we go out to dinner a lot. And I don't know, I found this place online and it sounded pretty cool. And we live in Myrtle Beach, South Carolina. And so I found this place finally. It took a while to find it. And it was a little hideaway bar. And I walked in this bar and I looked around and there didn't seem to be a whole hell of a lot to eat there. And then I saw there was a room in the back. And so we walked towards that room in the back, and I opened the door, and there were a whole bunch of people in there. And somebody came to and there was somebody speaking, and somebody came to the door and asked me, "Are you here for the AA group?" This is in a bar. They had an AA group in a bar.
That's funny.
It's just, I don't know, has nothing to do with Alzheimer's disease, but
No, but it's a funny story.
it cracked me up. And I didn't even think about that until the other day I was having lunch with a friend of mine and I mentioned it to him. We were talking about restaurants we go to. We all go out to eat a lot because we're too lazy to cook anymore. And he said, they had an AA group in a bar? Are you kidding me? And then it hit me. So that was really dumb, right? Anyway, all right. I
They
was
wanted to be
looking.
inconspicuous.
So I was looking the other day, I was looking around online at different groups and things, and I saw that there was a Alzheimer's support group at a local, what do you call it, assisted living place. And I thought to myself, that's kind of like having the AA group in a bar, right? Are they
It's
trying to rope you into coming there, or why is it that they're having the group there? So I'm always a little bit,
it's actually not designed or meant for the residents for
yeah,
obvious reasons.
yeah, I
It's
understand.
for family members and caregivers.
Right.
And I don't know if I have time to just tell you a real quick
You have
story, but
time to tell me whatever you want. That's fine.
okay, so this was the environment that I ran support groups in
Oh,
years.
okay.
It was at an assisted living place,
Mhm.
and they had memory care there too. So a lot of
Okay.
the folks who came to the group had loved ones, whether it was a spouse or a parent or a grandparent, who were like into the mid to later stage of dementia. And one of the things, this is a lesson that I want to share because I know it applies to a lot of you out there. When I first started my support group at this place, I was a novice. It was my first experience. And I believed that it was more important that they were all there because they wanted to understand what was happening to their loved one and know what the disease does to the brain and where these behaviors come from and everything that has to do with the person living with it. And I discovered, fortunately, early enough on, that a lot of the people that came to the support group, whether they were a caregiver or a family member or spouse, they were looking for people to understand what they were going through, to
Absolutely.
validate them. So
Right.
I changed the way I facilitated my support group to give the attendees a chance to talk about how they were getting through this and how they were feeling and what bothered them and how they were getting through every single day watching their. So I want to emphasize, and I think that this was a good opportunity to do that. People need to feel that they are understood. It's part of our basic human need. So it turned out it wasn't just about their loved one and understanding the disease and how do I respond without sending them into a meltdown situation, but understanding how they're dealing with the whole situation. And this is the point I was trying to make, where you have to really put yourself first because your health is completely dependent, and your mental health is completely dependent on how you are able to function as a family member during this journey or as a caregiver during this journey. So it's just as important to be validated and be acknowledged for what you're feeling as it is to understand what your loved one is going through.
Those are really good points, and I appreciate you making them. Lisa Skinner, I appreciate you being on with us on the Lean to the Left podcast. I really do. This is such an important topic. Affects so many people and devastates so many lives. And if there's any little thing we can do to increase understanding, I want to do that. And so thank you so much.
Thanks again for having me. I appreciate it very much.
Hey guys, I'm Bob Gatty, founder and host of Lean to the Left. I'm excited to share our new book, Hijack Nation, Donald Trump's Attack on America's Greatness, co-authored with political analyst and professor C.J. Waldron. In Hijack Nation, we delve into the unfolding story of America's political landscape through a series of essays from leantotheleft.net. We explore how Donald Trump's presidency has transformed American politics, challenging our values and institutions. Hijack Nation isn't just a book, it's a call to action. It invites you to reflect on what it means to be American in a divided political landscape. Together we can reclaim our nation's greatness. So get your copy of Hijack Nation today. Visit leantotheleft.net and click on the Books tab to learn more and to order.